We are going. We are live. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Our first attempt at an afternoon Ask the Agronomist. Appreciate everyone's flexibility. Apologize to those of you who may watch this recorded later, who might have been looking for it this morning at the normal 7:30 time. We had a unavoidable conflict with our producer that had to have a special meeting this morning. So Adam was gracious enough to join us here at our 1 o'clock timing. We're coming to you live from Yetter's training facility here on the north edge of Macomb, as usual. For the past couple times, we've been at off-site locations, so appreciate the folks at Yetter hosting us once again. My name is Lance Tarchioni, for those of you who don't know, and this is our Ask the Agronomist. So appreciate you joining us. If you have questions, please log in to YouTube with your YouTube account or a Gmail account, and you can chat those questions in to Adam, and he will ask those live. Adam and I have got some information that we're going to share based on conversations we've been having with growers, as we typically do. But always give preferential treatment to live chat questions, and that's what we're always hoping to have. And moving forward, we're going to experiment maybe with some different times on Ask the Agronomist. We may not move it with no notice like we did this one, but we have wondered about this early afternoon timing, if maybe that would be more convenient for people. We would like to have more live participation during the program if we can achieve that. Appreciate all of you who like to watch it after the fact as a recording. These recordings do exist for indefinite amount of time here on the site, so appreciate those of you that like to watch those. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of start things off with just a little bit of a crop review, I guess. I had an opportunity to do some traveling this week, went up into northern Illinois to help a colleague that has some pretty intense rootworm pressure, and we'll talk about that as well. I also want to talk about lack of sunlight, talk some about fungicide. From a crop condition standpoint, the crop really looks pretty nice in a lot of areas of the state, especially the corn crop. Good color, pretty good plant health at this point. Some of the holes and ponds and drowned out spots are not as obvious as they used to be when the corn was smaller. So probably if your corn hasn't been ruined by drought or ruined by flooding, you're probably pretty happy with the appearance of the corn crop. And I do think there's a lot of fields that have some really good potential. I am a little bit concerned with the lack of solar radiation that we've been receiving. Some of that due to just normal cloudy days from precipitation. A lot of it due to the upper level atmosphere being a little bit congested with smoke from some of the fires. And it was interesting. I looked up actually just this morning. I've got a new solar array that we installed at our house earlier this season, and I've got an app on my phone that shows me how many kilowatt hours we're generating on a daily basis. And the last day, or actually the day this year that it had the highest kilowatt hours recorded was actually in late May. And we haven't had a day since then where we had that good of sunlight. And it's been since back in June when we were, approaching that level. And there's just been a lot of days through June and July where we have not had peak sunlight. And typically solar radiation is not a yield limiting thing. Usually it's going to be moisture or nutrients or population or, some other more common, situation, a disease, an insect pest, weeds, something you deal with. We normally aren't worried about a lack of sunlight. But I do think this year that it is a little unique, the amount of cloudy days that we've had. Your crop is really nothing more than a solar collector, taking sunlight through photosynthesis, converting that into energy which that plant's going to use to make starch in the case of corn, or protein in the case of soybeans. And if sunlight is limiting, that can be a yield limiting factor. So if fall comes around and we've got fields that look good all summer, that had ample rainfall, that didn't have too much rain, that don't have ponds, don't have issues, and you're just not quite reaching the yield level that you maybe hoped and dreamed that it might have the potential to, based on how awesome it looked, I'm going to wonder if some of these cloudy days might possibly have been a factor in that. So just something to watch for. Not a huge concern at this point, but it's just we've had a lot of days where it's light out, but it's not bright light, and it's just kind of like dusk all day long, basically. So it's just been kind of weird, and I'm just wondering a little bit what impact that's going to have on photosynthetic rates and what impact that'll have on yield potential ultimately. So actually, Adam might have some thoughts on that. Some of his in his past life, he's worked with photosynthetic rates and has done research on photosynthesis. So I guess what's your thoughts, Adam, on that?
Yeah, I definitely think it might be to what you're saying, Lance, a unique year in that we might actually be more photo limited this year, especially with all the stresses that we've had coupled with that photo limitation. I think in particular the soybean is really, I think there's potential for some really good soybean yields out there. I think surface water, being able to get rid of surface water fast this year is going to be a big differentiating factor. I think you're going to notice a lot in the fields as you go through the fields. Right. But, as we've discussed before, soybean just isn't a happy camper when it's got saturated feet.
That was extremely apparent to me as I traveled into northern Illinois this week, which the drought that northern Illinois has been going through has been greatly talked about. And everybody knows that northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, northern Iowa, get up into Minnesota, the Dakotas. As you go north, it's been drier this year. And I've heard reports of places in southern Wisconsin, northern Iowa that have had maybe a couple inches total since planting, just amazingly dry in areas. And the soybeans are all over waist high up there. I mean, the soybeans are huge. 30-inch row beans closed the row a month ago. I saw lodged beans in northern Illinois. I don't have any beans in my territory tall enough to lodge. So being a little on the dry side, definitely the northern Illinois bean crop puts mine to shame. I don't know what the yield difference will be, but just as far as the vegetative growth, soybeans do not like setting in wet saturated soils, and that northern Illinois crop has never been in a wet saturated soil. And I would have to say, not to dash anyone's marketing plans for a big rally or something, the northern Illinois crop in general looked pretty good to me. I was pleasantly surprised, for as dry as those guys have been, how good that crop looked. So I'm hoping that even the dry areas are going to be able to timely. I would always take timely rains over excess rain. If you could be dry and get timely rains, that's kind of like having irrigation. And that's a really good way to raise a crop. Now, those guys are going to need timely rains because this crop's got a long way to go. We got some showers moving through today. Hopefully you can catch a rain without wind or hail, which it seems like in my territory, we have a hard time getting rain without wind and hail this year. But, timely rains from here on out is really what we're going to want. When you've gone through a growing season wet, the worst thing that can happen to you is you can get dry during grain fill. So we don't really want to be dry during grain fill. Our soils have the ability to store, upwards of 10 inches of moisture, plant available moisture in our best soils. But you being soggy, saturated, excess moisture, just too much of a good thing in some cases. So if you've been able to avoid that and get timely rains, potential is really tremendous. Or in the case of what Adam said, your well-drained fields, rolling fields, if your fields are full of ditches because of all the water that ran off of those fields, we'll have to deal with that as well. But if you could get that surface water gone quickly and send it on down the hill to the next recipient, wherever it ended up, that poor guy's got trouble. But where it came from, those fields look pretty good.
Doing all the work that we did, just to add to it a little bit, I always theorize that the absolute best growing condition that you could ask for is if you had subsurface irrigation, so that you don't get any evaporation, buildup of salts, and all the things that come along with, like irrigation, surface irrigation, or pivot irrigation. So subsurface irrigation, sunny every day,
Mhm.
warm during the day, and
Mhm.
cool at night.
Yep.
You really couldn't ask for much better growing conditions. And, just depending on where you're at this year, we got a little bit of all that, and sometimes too much water from the subsurface irrigation
Right.
setup this year. But
Yep.
let's transition just a little bit, Lance. Sort of look at where we're at this year as far as progression. So we went through most of the growing season. We're kind of getting over the top of the hump, and we're getting into some pretty important times. Like to get your thoughts on how you think, generally speaking, we pollinated, and how important the some of the fungicide applications could be, and some of the rest of the growing season is, as far as trying to fill out those kernels on these hybrids. And then also talk a little bit about soybean. I mean, where do you think we're at as far as regrowth potential? Do we have much more potential for these beans to put on extra vegetative growth and maybe some more flowers? What's your opinion there? I mean, we're still really always looking forward to that August rain, of course, to get those soybeans finished out.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about what left we've got to go.
So I think a lot of the corn is probably, R3-ish stage. There's probably some that's a little further along than that in some of the early planted areas. So R3 would be the milk stage. So that's the stage you're trying to hit when you're harvesting your sweet corn from maximum palatability. You start getting into the dough stage. That's where it's getting a little tough and a little chewy. That's the stage between milk and dent. And I would say most of the corn crop is somewhere in that late R2, R3, maybe early R4 stage. So we're about halfway through grain fill at that point in time. We've still got a lot of dry matter accumulation yet to go in those kernels. And this is where we're going to determine how deep and how big those kernels are going to be. Still have, a lot of yield potential to determine. Once we reach that R3 stage, we're generally beyond the stage that you can abort kernels. So if you're going to have tip back, you're going to see those kernels aborting before you get to R3. One thing you'd asked about pollination, I did have a grower that called me, was a little concerned about scattered random kernels on the ear that were aborting. And one thing that can cause that is if your pollination is not, perfectly happening and it gets a little bit strung out, and you've got a kernel that's someplace else on the ear other than the tip that happens to pollinate last, kernel abortion occurs in reverse of pollination. So the last kernel to pollinate is the first kernel to abort if that ear cannot, or that plant cannot support all those kernels. And you're never going to be able to support every kernel that you get pollinated. You almost always are going to have some kernel abortion. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you've got no aborted kernels and the kernels are falling off the tip of the ear, what that tells you is you're leaving yield on the table because you didn't have enough ears. So I'd like to see an inch and a half of tip back on every ear every time, because at least that tells me that, I'm maximizing my potential. I didn't need more ears than what I've got. Now, if you've got, 2 or 3 or 4 inches of tip back, you start getting zipper ears and ugly things like that, that tells you that you were resource limited, to a more severe degree. And, generally it's lack of moisture that's going to lead to some of those things. So, we're in pretty good shape from a moisture standpoint. I think we went through pollination relatively well. I did have calls from guys that were worried about, we were so wet during pollination. Pollination can't occur when it's wet. You need to have dry weather for pollination. And, pollination doesn't happen when it's hot, happens primarily in the daytime, and it happens when it's dry. And so if you didn't have any dryness during the daytime, during that pollination window, I did have some people who were getting nervous. Are we going to get the job done? But luckily for us, you don't have to be very efficient to do a good job pollinating, because we got hundreds of times more pollen than we need to get the job done in most fields. So we can be inefficient and still get the ear pollinated. And I think in most cases, even in some fields that got ravaged by hail to the point where 2/3 of the tassels got broken out of the top of the corn plant before pollination, even those fields have pollinated fairly well from what I've seen. So I haven't seen so far a lot of pollination issues. I think what we're going to come down to is, what's your ear count? What's your kernel size, depth, weight, those sort of things going to determine where our yield comes in. What we want from here on out would be a couple of those timely rains. Subsoil moisture is in good shape. As long as we can keep that, keep that plant hydrated, avoid extreme heat. We haven't had a lot of what I would call extreme heat. These nights where it's muggy and close, and you're watching the news at 10 o'clock at night and it's still 82. That's not ideal growing conditions. That corn crop would like to have a cooler night than that. So if we could have bright sunshine, 86, 87, 88 daytime high, drop down into the high 50s, low 60s at night, keep that plant hydrated, that's going to maximize its yield potential. I think we've got some crops, some fields with phenomenal yield potential. I think we'll see a lot of yield variability, which is normal. We talk about yield variability every year. I've had some guys out doing some kernel counts, and it's a little early to be doing yield checks, in my opinion, because you have no idea how big that kernel is going to be, and that'll swing that yield about 60 bushel one way or the other based on kernel size. So I had a guy say he done a yield check at 296 the other day. So I'm happy for him. I don't know what factor he used for kernels per bushel on that, but obviously even if he's wrong, that's still probably pretty good corn. And I think we've got fields out there with that kind of potential. Soybeans, on the other hand, I agree. I'm a little more bullish on the corn crop than I am the soybean crop, at least in my geography. Now, Northern Illinois, those guys don't even like to raise, so we've got some awful nice looking soybeans up there, and they might have better beans than they do corn, depending on how the rainfall goes the rest of the season. But I do think we've got more growth, vegetative growth left in soybeans than we typically do at this time of year. I'm not going to say they're going to get all the vegetative growth that they would have gotten, had we had better growing conditions early. But, we've got beans that are probably approaching R5 that are still flowering, and they're still growing, and they're still putting new nodes on. So they're going to do the best they can to, achieve that vegetative growth at the same time as filling pods. And, really when you're staging those soybeans, we always look at the uppermost 4 nodes. So, it doesn't really matter how big the pods are down deeper in the canopy. You want to look at the top 4 nodes. And as new nodes keep coming out, that top 4 keeps moving up. And so that's why sometimes soybeans appear to stay in that R3, R4 stage for a long time. Because, if you've got so say today you go out here and here's your 4th node. And on the 4th node, you got a 3/4 inch long pod. That's R4. So if you got 3/4 inch pods on the top 4 nodes, that's R4. So if that's the 4th node, here's the 3rd, here's the 2nd, here's the 1st. Well, next week when you come back, there's going to be another node up here, which is now the 1st. That's now the 2nd. And that's now the 3rd. And that's now the 4th. This one no longer matters because it's not in the top 4 anymore. So now if you've got a 3/4 inch long pod here, you're still R4. And as long as you keep putting new nodes on, you might, in theory, hang out in that R4 stage, longer than you think. Now, when we start getting seeds in pods on the top 4 nodes, that's when we get into R5. So if you're finding seeds inside the pods on the top 4 nodes, you're probably at the end of R4, maybe pushing into the R5 growth stage. And if you found yourself, and I want to spend some time talking about this, if you found yourself on the waiting list to get fields sprayed with fungicide, R5 is probably as late as I would be comfortable investing in a fungicide if it was me, and that's pushing it. Because we've got good commodity prices, hopefully you can still get enough of a benefit to justify making that application if you haven't been able to make it. R4 is kind of the tail end of the traditional R2 to R4, R3 being the sweet spot window. R5 really isn't in the window. That doesn't mean you can't get a benefit from a fungicide application at R5, but that shouldn't be a target. And I think in those scenarios, you might actually get more benefit out of the insecticide than you do the fungicide, frankly, in that scenario. And I have seen situations before where you get such a benefit out of the insecticide would pay for the whole operation, even if the fungicide doesn't do anything for you. So I'm a big promoter of a product like Leverage, in with that R3, R4-ish fungicide application for the benefits that insect control can provide to us. But if you're finding seeds in pods, at the top 4 nodes, you are about at the end of when I would say, it would make any sense to put a fungicide on. On corn, R2 is usually when we brown silk. So R2 is the blister stage. Usually by R2, you're pretty solid brown silk. You've got dry brown silks, not damp, green, fresh brown silks. I had a guy tell me one time that one of the rules of thumb he used was if you held a match to corn silks and they would burn, that's too late to put fungicide on. So if they're damp brown silks, you're probably still in that window. If you're to R3, which is that roasting ear stage, that's kind of, to me, equivalent to about that R5 stage in soybeans, where you're out of the traditional window at that point. And I'm not saying there can't still be a benefit, but your odds of getting a benefit are going down. And the average size of the benefit that you're going to get as far as additional bushels is also going down. So we don't have to have as many bushels to make it a positive ROI as we typically do with the commodity prices that we're looking at this year. But I'm going to say, our R3 is about the time to shut it down in corn. R5 would be the time to shut it down in soybeans. And I think as we look forward into next year, I think we've all kind of learned that, when there's massive amounts of fungicide being sprayed, trying to predict when the field is going to hit the target window, and recognizing that window is a bigger than a 2-day window, and it's okay to be a little early. It's okay to be a little late. We don't have to be perfect, but I think we can help our applicators out by trying to predict when we're going to be in the window rather than waiting until we're in the window to decide that we want to get on the boat. If you wait till you're in the window, decide you want to get on the boat and the ship has already sailed, it's hard to get on the boat at that point in time. So I think the lesson that maybe we've learned the hard way this year is the better job we can do anticipating when those fields are going to be at the right stage, and recognizing that the right stage is a fairly wide window, and we shouldn't really be too concerned if we're towards the early part of the window or in the middle of the window or sliding to the back end of the window. You just want to be in the window. And I think in some cases there were some fields that probably could have been sprayed a week or 10 days earlier than somebody asked them to be, and you would have been at the front side of the window rather than sliding clear out of the window on the backside. So it's a little bit like herbicide applications. It's easier to be too late than it is too early. And our applicators are doing the best job they can. Those guys are flying every day they can fly. They're covering every acre they can cover. They've got limitations with weather. They've got limitations with safety. They've got limitations with equipment. They've got limitations with, we've all got limitations. And we just, some people have estimated there's 3x the number of acres getting treated with fungicide this year as compared to last year, and a 3x increase in acres, in 1 year. How many people would have probably anticipated that ahead of time? So give the applicators a little grace. They're doing the best job they can. We can, I think, as growers, help them in the future by getting those orders turned in a little earlier. Doesn't matter when you bought the product. What matters is, when did you ask the field to be sprayed? And you need to be, trying to do the best job you can do, anticipating when that field should need to be sprayed. And hopefully we can, get the acres covered. Need a little help from Mother Nature. And probably, next year, maybe we won't be treating as many acres as we are this year. Who knows? It's seems to be kind of the thing to do this year. Other years, it's, people are less eager to make those applications. And so that varies a little bit from 1 year to the next.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely been a very aggressive dynamic this year with all the fungicide application that's going on. I mean, guys, I know lots of people, everybody in the industry that I talk to is really working hard to try and get as much of it done as fast as they can possibly get it done. I see people in planes, people in rigs, people in helicopters just going right up until dusk and very first thing. So I know everybody's working hard on it, and I think you're right, Lance. We need to try and give them as much heads up as we can in the future, and cut them as much slack as we can this year. Because man, they got a lot on their plate.
And I think too, and it's easy for you and I to say this, Adam, because we're in the business. We sell fungicide. We're very pro fungicide people. I know in my operation, I'm going to spray fungicide next year, both crops, every acre. I know that now. I'm going to do it the year after that. I know that now. There's not very many things, unless my crop is destroyed by drought, destroyed by hail, destroyed by something. If I've got a crop there, I'm going to spray it. And the more you can plan ahead, so decide, are you going to use fungicides to manage your crop? If so, good. That next year already, put the plan in motion, make sure that your applicator knows that, hey, I'm going to do this next year. I'm going to do every acre. I'm going to do my best to give you as much lead time as I can on when my fields are going to be ready to spray. We're going to go off a growth stage. So, I'm a big growth stage guy. So you don't have to be scouting for disease to use fungicides. You need to be scouting for growth stage. So, you don't have to be out there every day looking for the disease. What you need to know is, when's my corn going to be at green silk, because that's when I want to spray it. And when's my soybeans going to be at R3, because that's when I want to spray them. And we can anticipate a little bit better probably than we did this year when fields are going to be at that stage, and let everybody know ahead of time, are you in or are you out? And if you're in, good. And if you're out, realize that if you change your mind and decide to get in late, might be hard to get that done. So one other thing I will add to that, I keep forgetting to mention this too. Let's not forget that we do have the ground rig option on soybeans. A lot easier than corn. If you got access to a high boy, we can do corn with ground rig too. But we can do every acre of soybeans out there with standard ground equipment if we want to. Now, I know the wheel track thing is a little bit painful to look at. On my operation, I had already been across all my soybean fields twice post. With either herbicides or other fungicide applications or nutritional applications. I had some pretty good tram lines set up in my 15-inch row beans, and where the applicators did a nice job, and they did do a nice job staying in those tram lines. That third pass we made with fungicide a week ago, very minimal, additional damage over what, we had already done with the earlier applications. So I understand if you've only posted the field once, and that was a long time ago, and those beans are just perfect. It's really hard to drive through there with a sprayer and not cringe. So I understand that, but frankly, we're probably in most cases not reducing enough yield to offset the difference in cost of application of ground versus air. And it kind of feels like the aerial guys are, they're pretty busy. So if they lose an acre here and there to a ground rig on soybeans, I'm not sure they're going to be terribly upset about that when they're as busy as they are. So do keep that in mind, that if you're frustrated that you can't get them sprayed timely, you don't have to do it by air. You can do it by ground. And you might get them done more quickly in some cases if you give your applicator that option.
So, Lance, you mentioned you went up north and talking a little bit about some rootworm infestations up there. I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more about that. I've been hearing some things myself. Curious as to what geography that is happening in, and also what other late season pests are we seeing? Are we seeing much pressure? Are you seeing many things out in the field right now with late season pests or not?
Yeah. So first, to touch on the rootworm, that was I'll call it an illuminating trip that I took to Northern Illinois, and I went up there to help Jim Donnelly, who's our colleague in Northern Illinois. And Jim has the distinction of being both the tar spot guy and the rootworm guy. And if there's two guys you don't want to be, it's the tar spot guy and the rootworm guy. The northern, I'm going to say the northern two tiers of counties across the northern part of Illinois, That's where we historically have a lot more continuous corn production. And this year in particular, those counties were extremely dry early. So we had very good, we've got heavy rootworm populations. We had good conditions for overwintering eggs. We had perfect conditions for virtually, apparently, 100% larval survival in the spring. We didn't drown any up there this spring. And the rootworm pressure is intense. It is as bad up there as anything I've ever seen in central Illinois, even back in 2010, 2011, 2012, when we thought we had bad rootworm pressure. I don't think we've ever had what those guys are dealing with this year in northern Illinois. So it was, a lot of times we get a little bit of lodging. And generally, when you get a little bit of lodging, that's when somebody notices, oh, maybe I got rootworm problems. Well, you can have lodging that has nothing to do with rootworm feeding. And typically in our part of the world today, lodging isn't related to rootworm feeding. It's just related to the soil or the hybrid or planting date or what have you. You dig the roots, there's no rootworm feeding. It's lodged, yes, and that's not good, but it's not lodged because rootworm ate the roots. So I kind of wondered when I went up north to help those guys on root digs, would I get into some fields that were lodged? Yes, but they weren't lodged because of rootworm. I didn't find that. They're all lodged because of rootworm, because they are heavily fed on in some cases, and even traits showing pretty heavy levels of feeding up there. So Smart Stacks is hanging in there better than anything else in the marketplace today. But I can't say that it's providing satisfactory control in those long-term continuous corn-on-corn fields. So the guys in northern Illinois, unfortunately, even with Smart Stacks Pro coming, which is going to give us a bigger tool in the toolbox, that pressure up there is so heavy, and there's probably a good level of resistance as well to go along with the heavy pressure. So my analogy is water hemp. For us, we've got a lot of water hemp pressure, and we've got quite a bit of herbicide resistance in water hemp. So you have to be using the right products at the right rate and right timing, and you got to get 99.9% control, or it's a disaster. The rootworm pressure that they've got in northern Illinois right now, they need 99% control to be satisfied, and you can't get 99% control of rootworm with really anything that's available today. So, we definitely saw some separation in performance of traits. So if you wanted to be here and you're here with this trait and you're down here with these traits, you're probably unhappy with all of them. And is the one that's better than the others, if it's still not as good as you want, that's not a particularly great situation to be in. So we can show advantages to Smart Stacks, but unfortunately the pressure is so high, it's not good enough to satisfy people either. So we're looking at rotation in some cases rotation is always going to be our number one recommendation. And I was in a field, I'd like to tell this story. We had a 6390, which for those of you who love 6390, you probably know it doesn't have the most robust root system in the world. And they still raise a lot of 6487 in northern Illinois, which Adam will smile at me when I say this. Almost every field that's signed in northern Illinois has got a 6487 sign on it. So he's chuckling off camera there. So northern Illinois, 6487 is their number one volume hybrid. So it has handled that environment very well. It has not been beat yet by any of our newer hybrids that have been far better for us here in central Illinois. So northern Illinois has got a 6487 habit that they cannot kick. So this particular field, 6487 on the continuous corn part of the field. One end of this farm is lighter ground and they rotate it. So 6390 on first year corn. Separated by, and I've got pictures of this, separated by a 20-foot wide grass lane. And I dug roots in the 6390 about 6 rows into the field. They were perfect. No feeding whatsoever, just beautiful. 6487 over on the other side of the field lane, that's continuous long-term corn on corn. I went about 6 or 8 rows into that field, dug a couple roots. Didn't take much effort to knock the soil off of them because there just wasn't much root left there. And I dug those roots probably literally 50 feet apart from each other, separated by nothing other than a strip of mowed grass. And the rotated field had no rootworm pressure, and Smart Stacks is getting eaten alive in the continuous corn side of the field. And for those of you who know those two hybrids, you know, the better rooted hybrid is 6487. But I've got a picture that would make 6390 look like it's got the best root system in the world when you compare it to the 6487 and the continuous corn. So it's going to be a combination of management. We're going to have to get far more aggressive at managing rootworm. You know, one way we get more aggressive is we rotate more acres, and guys up there don't want to hear that. And I was in some fields, Adam, that had some stones big enough that, you know, and I'm not a little guy, and I walked over some rocks that I probably couldn't have gotten in the back of my truck. They were that big. And if that field, I'm going to kind of agree with the grower, soybeans probably not an option, because you're not going to be able to harvest the darn things. But there are some fields up there that could be rotated, just people really don't want to. And so we need to work on that. I think there are some situations where adult beetle control, you know, maybe putting insecticide in with our corn fungicide would be a positive step. Now, the timing may not be right on that. You cannot control rootworm completely with adult beetle control programs. That's been tried and failed back in the day. There are guys using soil insecticide again in Northern Illinois. I was actually in a field, had 6487, again, #1 hybrid, Northern Illinois. Corn on long-term continuous corn with full rate of force on it. Root rating about a 1.5 on a node injury scale. Quite a bit of lodging in the field. Lodge plants would have rated over a 2 on a node injury scale. So throwing insecticide on top of Smart Stacks is not a complete solution. I think there's going to be people that probably try to do that. You know, insecticides, we know this. If you've been around long enough, you know this. People very quickly quit using insecticide when traits came along, for multiple reasons. It wasn't all just the cost, and it wasn't all just the safety of handling the product. It was also that they were notoriously inconsistent and didn't give a high enough level of protection to get maximum yield. So insecticide use, while it's probably going to go back up in some areas because it is a tool in the toolbox, you know, it's not a perfect solution. Smart Stacks Pro is not going to be a perfect solution because that product has its limitations as well. It is the best trait that anyone has ever developed, and under normal pressure, it looks awesome. Under the pressure that Northern Illinois got today, you know, it's not going to be perfect either. So there is not a silver bullet solution, easy button solution to corn rootworm management in Northern Illinois. I think it's going to take multiple practices. It's going to take rotation, get that population knocked back with a year of soybeans, then come in there with Smart Stacks Pro and try to kind of reset the clock. But, you know, I spent a day and a half. I was in Stevenson. What's the county in northwestern Winnebago, maybe around Galena, Elizabeth area. Carroll County. I was kind of in the northwestern part of the state. We had another team of people that were digging in the northeastern part of the state. So really those top 2 tiers of counties all the way across the state, I would say that's where we've got the heaviest rootworm pressure. And we need to be, you know, paying attention to what's going on up there. They do more corn on corn than we do. And I think that's going to help us, you know, stave off maybe, you know, having that situation. But, you know, seeing a lot of northerns as well up there. So there's extended diapause northerns, there's variant westerns, there's the regular northern, there's the regular western. There's just a lot of everything up there. And so, you know, just a lot of challenges. And I think if anything, it was just a really good reminder that rootworm can really hamper your ability to raise the kind of corn that you want to raise. And we are very fortunate today that we've got relatively low pressure. We're using Double Pro extremely successfully with no rootworm protection whatsoever. And we probably shouldn't count on being able to do that forever. We should appreciate the fact that we can do it now. And you can appreciate the fact that you can do it now without counting on being able to do it forever.
Yeah, pretty interesting dynamic there. Tough deal, all that rootworm pressure up there. I was curious while you're up there as well if you saw any tar spot. We know that you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Donnelly being the tar spot and the rootworm guy and
Yeah.
being in a tough position. I mean, what was the tar spot pressure up there looking like this year?
To be honest with you, the parts of the state I was in have been pretty dry, and I was looking for rootworm rather than tar spot, and I frankly didn't notice a lot of tar spot. Now Jim, he's got a better eye for it than I do. He says he can find it in about every field. I did have a call earlier today from a grower in the Quad Cities area that walked out into a field of corn on corn, had, the lower leaves had quite a bit of tar spot on them, enough that he kind of got a little bit freaked out about it. Now he's had more moisture than Northern Illinois had, and so there might be maybe on the I-80 corridor, maybe, where there might be a sweeter spot for tar spot than where I was working this week, where it's been super dry. But I didn't notice a lot of tar spot where I was. I'm sure if I was looking for it, I probably could have found it. But I was in a lot of fields, and I didn't walk into any of them and go, holy crap, this is look at all this tar spot.
Yeah.
So it was not that noticeable where I was at. You couldn't escape the rootworm, but you really didn't see a lot of tar spot. But I do know that there's tar spot out there. The field that the grower called me about that was in the Quad Cities area, it had fungicide on it, competitive product. The tar spot was down low on the plant, and even if they had used the best product on the market for tar spot, I'm not sure you would have gotten protection on those lower leaves. The upper leaves from the ear up, no signs of it at all. My recommendation to him was to keep an eye on it. I don't think we need to go back with a sequential application of fungicide at this time. But if we do get, cool, wet August conditions, you've got the disease there. It's on the lower leaves, and that is the scenario where, it could blow up into the upper canopy and maybe become an issue if the weather's right. But hopefully, between the weather not being right and the fungicide application that he had used, we'll keep that suppressed into the lower canopy and at least slow it down to the point where it doesn't impact yield. It will eventually probably be up through the plant, but if what you're seeing in the upper part of the plant is a lesion here and a lesion there on a leaf, not a big deal. So as long as it's not destroying a significant amount of leaf area above the ear, probably not going to impact yield. But we do know that obviously the inoculum is there, and we're building those inoculum levels every time we have an outbreak.
Yeah, in my area, I think I could probably walk into maybe not all but several fields, and if I'm looking for tar spot, I can probably find a little.
Yeah.
Nothing to be concerned about, like you said, but it's definitely there. And obviously, as you mentioned, we've got some environmental conditions that have probably been more favorable for tar spot. Maybe in this area of the state versus up north, where they had the big outbreak of it last year. I'll tell you something I have been seeing quite a bit of. Don't know if you have or not, Lance, but I've been seeing more southern rust showing up this year than what I typically would, and maybe slightly earlier and more aggressively than what I am used to on average. I have seen that ugly guy turning everything brown out there in a couple fields, especially on some lower leaf tissue.
And I think we've with the humidity that we've had, you don't have. That's one thing that I think sometimes people don't always understand is you don't have to have rain to have diseases. Matter of fact, some diseases, they prefer humid days over rainy days. Gray leaf spot's that way. If it rained all day, every day, we wouldn't have a lot of gray leaf spot because it needs to have a dry period for it to sporulate and spread. And so it needs a cycle of wet, dry, wet, dry. So ideal conditions for a lot of these fungi are these damp, heavy mornings where you've got dew that doesn't dry off until 11 o'clock. And then it's hot and breezy in the afternoon. And that's perfect conditions for a lot of the fungi. That's really the environment that we're in. I'm seeing physoderma. We're seeing tar spot. We're seeing gray. You're talking southern. I've seen common. I haven't seen any northern yet this year. So it seems like our conditions weren't right for northern. Our germplasm has pretty high level of resistance to northern. So I might need to be in somebody else's corn to have a better chance of finding it. But I haven't seen any northern yet. And I haven't seen enough of anything to really hurt anything at this point. They're just there. But the fact that they're there with the conditions we're having, we got a long way to go on this crop. I think people that invested in a fungicide this year will be happy that they did. In another 30 days, there's going to be a visual difference between fields that got sprayed and fields that didn't get sprayed. And hopefully the people that invested in that fungicide will, feel like they got a very positive return on that investment at harvest.
I definitely agree with you on that. I think there's going to be a lot of people pretty tickled with what they were able to get fungicide applications on. Switch gears just a little bit, kind of say on the pest topic, but in my territory, I don't know if you're seeing any up there, maybe in Mason County and some of the territory that you cover, but you seen any nematode pressure this year in soybean? We've got some samples that we've sent off. We're waiting to hear back from the results of those. But let's talk a little bit about what options for control we have with nematodes. I know.
Can we talk about things we can fix?
Yeah. I know that could be a short conversation. Obviously, the biggest one probably being rotation, crop rotation, but especially down the river bottom.
Are you corn or soybeans?
Soybean.
Okay. So yeah, we just had that painful conversation about rootworm, and there's more options to control rootworm than there are nematodes. So nematodes is a tough one. They're still work ongoing with developing new and better seed treatments for nematode control. There's not really any silver bullets for nematodes. We have genetic resistance in soybeans that I use the term resistance in quotation marks. It's imperfect. There are some better sources of resistance that tend to come along with pretty significant yield penalty, and that makes it difficult for soybean seed breeders to develop high yielding cyst resistant lines. And I would argue that there's a few acres out there that would benefit from a low yielding but better cyst bean. The trouble is there's just not a lot of those acres out there, and most seed providers aren't excited about breeding low yielding soybeans with better cyst resistance. Those products kind of come along occasionally if they've got a different source of cyst resistance. The PI 88788 source that virtually everybody is using in everything, easy to breed with, easy to get high yielding soybeans, nice agronomics, good standability, everything you're looking for in a bean except really high level of cyst protection. So rotation out of soybeans into corn or wheat, or lengthening out that soybean, not having soybeans in that field every other year. So kind of the opposite conversation. I'm trying to get Northern Illinois to embrace raising some soybeans in some cases, and in other situations, raising fewer soybeans would benefit the soybean cyst situation. Now, if you're in a part of the county, and typically where we have soybean cysts, we also have parasitic corn nematodes, the other species like needle and lance and dagger and those other species that impact corn more than they do soybeans. You can't just go corn forever either, or the corn nematodes will overcome your corn crop. So, finding the right balance of rotation. So, maybe it's a couple years of corn and then your soybeans. If you have the ability to get wheat into rotation, if you're on light soil, maybe a crop like sorghum or wheat or something that's a little bit not traditional, maybe we could be incorporated in there. There's work going on that cover crops have shown the potential in some cases to suppress nematode populations. There are still seed treatments that are available. Levo, which is primarily known as a fungicide seed treatment to suppress sudden death, is also a good nematicide. There are a couple other nematicide products that are available as a seed treatment. The challenge with those products has just been, can you deliver enough active ingredient into the soil in the root zone to effectively control something that's as aggressive as nematodes can be? And back to your question, is this a bad nematode year? Wet years are, most nematodes like moisture, and the more moisture you've had, that kind of favors the conditions for the nematode, keeps the soil cool. They're more active in cool soils and they're more active in wet soils. And so, we could have maybe had a good year for nematodes in some cases due to the excess moisture. So have I specifically seen, huge issues in my territory this year? No, not really. Most of the, there's some ugly fields, but they're ugly due to water more than nematodes. But, every stress can compound each other. So if you got a field that's had some challenges with water, had some challenges with nutrient availability, had some challenges with nematodes, I mean, that you're just piling stress after stress after stress on top of that crop. And stressed crops can't outgrow nematodes as good as a non-stressed crop. So if your crop's dealing with other stresses and there's also nematodes present, that just multiplies, magnifies the stress that plant's under. And they are a tough one. Rotation is the number one recommendation always for suppressing nematodes. The other thing I would say relative to soybeans, and this is a little bit, I won't say it's controversial, but it seems a little counterintuitive. I have seen an indication, and farmers that raise soybeans on sandy soils with heavy nematode pressure have, say they've observed this. Early planting is probably not going to be beneficial if you've got heavy nematode populations on, sandy soils. That is because those nematodes are a lot more aggressive and a lot more active early when soils are cool, and the soybeans are growing so slow early when soils are cool. The nematode has the advantage over the soybean in that situation. So I have seen some situations where guys that farm sandy soils with heavy nematode populations have, gotten in on the early planted soybean craze and had some very disappointing results. And it seemed like it almost made the nematode problem worse. And so there may be some situations where delaying planting on some of those really heavy infested soils so that soil's warmer and that plant's growing faster, and you shift it out of the peak of the part of the season for the nematode, that might actually be better. So I guess be a little bit cautious about getting in on the Easter soybean planting window if you've got soils that have heavy nematode pressure.
Not a widespread problem, but can be pretty detrimental in certain isolated field areas.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of different species. We've seen there's the corn parasitic nematodes, there's soybean cyst, root knot nematode has been found in Mason County, CAS as well, I believe. So there's a lot of different species of nematode, and a lot of research being done, looking for, nematicides are very hard to develop because, nematodes are not insects. They're in their own class, but they're closer to an animal than they are to an insect. They're a worm. They're in their own category, but you and I have a lot more in common with a nematode biologically than we do with an insect. And so as a rule, nematicides are far more toxic to mammals, which we would be, birds, fish, other mammals than insecticides, pesticides, other classes of chemistry are. So that's why a lot of the old nematicides, Furadan, Thimet, Counter to a certain extent is still available, but restricted. That's why a lot of those products have gone away, because they are pretty toxic. They're hard to handle, not particularly environmentally friendly. And, so it's really difficult for a company, if you wanted to make a new nematicide, to meet today's standards for product safety and still kill nematodes. That's a big ask. And so they're not easy products to develop. I mentioned Counter. One recommendation I do make, if you're growing corn and you've got nematodes, I would have the ability to have a closed handling insecticide system on my planter, and I would be using that product, because it is really the one remaining chemical nematicide / insecticide that you could apply while you're planting corn. It does not control all species of nematodes. It really is just suppression. It does not last season long. It's not a silver bullet solution, but it does help. And so if you're frustrated with corn nematodes, I would say incorporating Counter into your system would be a recommendation that I would make, and make sure that the herbicide program that you're using is compatible with that, because there are some products that have interactions with that chemistry. It's not something that's fun to use, but it can be helpful.
So we're flirting right between about 8 minutes left here.
Okay.
So I'd just like to remind everybody that our next session is going to be on August 5th. If you got any more questions, please get them in there before we get done with today's session. We got a little time here to try and answer them. If you like these things, please try and join us live. We love to have live questions and live conversation. It makes it fun for us. I think we come up with some great content, very pertinent, based on all the conversations that other technical agronomists, other reps are having. But it's fun to have live interaction with people. So
Right.
If you have any questions, even if you can't interact live, if you can, just let us know what questions you have. We'd love to answer them.
Speaking of that, I'll put my cell number up here on the board. You can text me questions. I do get emails and texts from growers that they didn't really want to participate in the live function, but I do get people sending me stuff saying, "Hey, this would be good for you to talk about on Ask the Agronomist." So send that stuff in too, please. I'll put my email up here.
And Jennifer, one of our co-producers, she isn't here today. She had some other things going on, but she's really, really great at, if you do ask questions, she's been sending out some little gifts and toys and things like that, because we really do appreciate that.
I snuck a question in one time and I didn't get anything.
You might be exempt, Lance. I'll have to read the fine print on that, but give us a like too. There's a little thumb icon if you're watching this video and it's not live. That's great. That's awesome. That's why we record them and keep them on there so you can catch up when it's convenient for you. But hit that like button. Let us know that you like what you're seeing. Feel free to drop a comment in there. We'll try and catch it later in the next one. Share it with your friends. There's a little arrow button. That's how you share it. It's how you let somebody else know. And really, truly subscribe to our channel. We do a lot of other things, Ask the Agronomist being one of them. But, Chris Carlisle on our team, the other technical agronomist, he does a lot of different infield videos. Lance does different infield videos about current topics and current situations. So, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell. I'll let you know whenever we post something new. And then you can either join live if it's Ask the Agronomist, or you can check it out whenever it's convenient for you. So the last thing I got, Lance, we don't have any more questions showing up at the moment, but I was just wanting to know what your opinion is and how you're holding out in your neck of the woods when it comes to weed control.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it's been a pretty tough year, tough environment for weed control, particularly with corn and beans, both, but particularly with soybeans.
Right.
With
corn hides its weed control challenges far better than soybeans.
Absolutely. So just curious, we got about 5 minutes left here, how things are holding up with weed control.
So I would say just off the top of my head, observations I've made, we had excellent performance from our soil residual pre-emergent products this year. I mean, the rainfall that we had good activating rainfall early. Some years we have a lot of trouble getting enough rainfall to activate those products. And I think in general, especially the PPO class of herbicides, I think performed extremely well this year from a standpoint of doing a good job tamping down that water hemp pressure that we have to deal with post. Now, on the flip side of that, we did have some injury concerns with some of those pre-emergence products, and we talked about that on some earlier episodes. And typically, when you've got good conditions and that chemistry is pretty hot, and you're seeing some crop response, you're probably also seeing some really good weed control. So that's kind of the blessing that goes along with the curse of crop injury sometimes. So I would say our pre's work very well. Fields that did not get a pre, we need to quit doing that. I drove past some fields this year that it was pretty obvious didn't get anything down on them. And the days of being able to get a clean field of beans without pre-emergence chemistry to start the year out, I think are in the past. We just don't have the tools to clean up disasters like we did before glyphosate resistance became a common thing. I've said this before. There was really only ever one herbicide that was good at killing big weeds post, and that was glyphosate. And it still is good at killing big weeds post if they're not resistant to it. So, it is still the one herbicide that was really ever good at killing big weeds. everything else that we're using today, whether it's Liberty, dicamba, 2,4-D, pick your conventional chemistry, needs to be used on small weeds. So I guess the other soapbox I get up on frequently, and you got to have a stout soapbox for me to get up on it, Adam. But I'm thinking of making one and I'll use it on.
I've got one built pretty similar.
Yeah. I could probably borrow yours. So anyway, we are waiting too late to spray beans. And I know people get frustrated in the case of our system with dicamba with the cutoff date of June 20th. There were not very many soybean fields in the state of Illinois that should not have been posted before June 20th. And I might have said that in a confusing way, but we need to get more beans sprayed before June 20th, regardless of what system you're using. So I was out walking bean fields, some competitive fields, 4th of July weekend. And I don't know who, got the privilege of spraying some of these other systems over 4th of July weekend, but they probably didn't want to be in a sprayer on the 4th of July weekend. And there are some places where a lot of fields that had not been posted yet by the 4th of July weekend that had knee-high and taller mare's tail, knee-high and taller water hemp, knee-high and taller giant ragweed, knee-high and taller velvet leaf, even knee-high grass in some cases. And we can kill knee-high grass and soybeans still, but we shouldn't be doing that. I've driven past fields in the past couple of weeks that the beans are thigh high and the dead tops of the weeds are sticking up out of the tops of the beans. So we really need to try to be more timely with our post applications if we can. If you've switched to a system that has a label that's loose enough to let you spray all summer long, which technically none of them do. We still have crop restrictions that we should be abiding by. So there aren't really any herbicides labeled after R2 on soybeans. And we're talking about beans are R5 maybe. So, just keep in mind that any herbicide that you're spraying now, you're probably off label with, based on the stage of the crop. So we need to follow our labels, but we just need to figure out a way. And I know for my retail applicator friends that are listening, I know the workload is horrific on you guys. I know it's challenging to spray corn and beans all at the same time. I know it's challenging to get across the acres. We can plant this crop so fast these days, and everybody's trying to be early. Everybody's trying to be first. Everybody's trying to get a second planter so they can plant corn and beans at the same time. And when you're doing bean burn down, corn pre, corn post, beans burn down, bean post, all same time, it's a real what show. And it's a challenge. But we got to figure out a way to manage through all that. And there really is not a technology available today or a technology on the horizon, as far as that goes, that I think is going to allow us to push soybean herbicide applications later in the season and be successful. Can you apply products later in the season? Yes. Should you expect them to work when you do? No. You can set those weeds back, you can burn the tops out, but you're not going to kill them. And I think there's a lot of acres that there's a lot of weeds that were never completely killed that are today recovering down in that canopy. And in a couple of weeks, you're going to see them coming back up through the top of the beans. And that's going to be some people's first realization that, oh, I didn't kill that. You just made it mad, burned it off, it's going to come back. So we need to keep targeting those small weeds. And, I sprayed every acre of my beans twice post. And I know guys don't want to hear that is a recommendation. But, I did some other fungicide stuff, some other nutritional stuff while I was there to help justify the fact that I was making that other pass. There's a lot of fields that the outside got sprayed a second time post. Some of those fields, probably in another month, you're going to be kicking yourself that you didn't spray the whole field a second time post, because the outside's worse than the inside, but the inside's not going to be perfectly clean either. So I think combination of tough weeds, late applications, a lot of rainfall, stunted beans in some cases. I am still bracing for the weediest soybean crop that we've seen in several years before the season's done. There's a lot of fields that look pretty good today. But just because they look good from the road today, I don't know how pretty they'll look in a month when those weeds finally come up through the canopy. So with that, we'll sign off for this episode. Thanks to those of us who joined us. Apologize for the shift in timing, and we'll be back with you August 5th, right, Adam?
Sure.
I think that was the date. So 2 weeks from today, and send those questions in. Appreciate your time. Thank you.